I'm back, baby.
Hey guys, June here, and previously in this video series we've talked about some of the less serious aspects of psychology as it pertains to RuneScape in sort of a playful context, but in this video I want to be a little bit more serious because I'm talking about video game addiction. We'll talk about where gaming addiction comes from as well as the driving forces behind it, but I wanted to start the video off with a plea for everybody to just please try to keep the trolling down in the comment section just of this video in particular, because there's likely going to be quite a few of you who are suffering from issues like this on some level or another. It's a pretty widespread issue in gaming, and in particular in MMORPGs, and given the size of the RuneScape community, you're likely friends with several people who suffer from these kinds of issues, and the most important thing that you can do to be helpful is to be supportive. Let's start by taking a look at the different types of addiction and defining what we're talking about for this video. There's actually quite a bit of disagreement among psychologists about what constitutes an addiction and how many different categories they should be separated into. The first is physiological addiction, or what sometimes was called type A addiction. This category of addiction is defined by the body's adaptation to the presence of a chemical to the point where that when the abrupt absence of that chemical occurs, the individual experiences some kind of a withdrawal effect. So for example, an individual who is physiologically addicted to caffeine, if they don't get coffee in the morning, they may experience a headache or feel lethargic. Doctors and psychologists have actually recently started calling this type of addiction chemical dependency rather than addiction, to try and distinguish it from the psychological forms of addiction that much more strongly influence behavior. Then we have two types of psychological addiction. The first is often called primary addiction, in which case the substance or behavior that the individual is addicted to provides some direct positive effect that stimulates the mesolimbic pathway in the brain and causes the individual to desire to repeat that effect frequently. A good example of addictions of this type would be things like sex addiction or gambling addiction, where the psychological high caused by the behavior itself is what the individual is desiring. Now, in a reductionist sense, this type of addiction is really just an individual repeating a behavior that they enjoy frequently. And so, in order to be classified as an addiction, psychologists add the caveat that the consequences of the behavior need to be significantly detrimental to the individual's life. For example, a person who sets aside a small amount of their earnings every week so that they can make a yearly trip to Las Vegas wouldn't be classified as a gambling addict. However, a person who maybe visits a casino every week or 2 weeks and frequently finds themselves unable to pay for utilities, pay rent, or maybe even buy food definitely would qualify as a person who's addicted to gambling. Finally, we have the last common classification, which is the secondary form of psychological addiction. In this case, the substance or behavior that the individual is addicted to is being used as a coping skill or a means of self-medicating for a separate and usually unrelated psychological issue. You see this type of addiction very commonly in individuals who suffer from things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, chronic depression, ADHD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. These people often turn to things like drugs and alcohol as a means of accommodating some of the symptoms from their primary disorder. So, for example, in the case of schizophrenia, an individual might be using crack cocaine to temporarily suppress the auditory and visual hallucinations that they experience from their schizophrenia. Likewise, a person with serious bipolar disorder may turn to things like alcohol in order to soften their mood swings and keep themselves more level, but on the whole, all of these individuals are dealing with their primary issues' symptoms with this secondary addiction. Gaming addiction appears to fall into this last category, where the individuals who are addicted to these MMORPGs are using them as a substitute for social interaction in the case where there's likely an underlying social anxiety disorder. Now remember, it's perfectly fine to enjoy RuneScape and the social interactions in it as well as other MMORPGs. In order to qualify as an addiction, there need to be serious consequences for the individual from this behavior, so using the case of RuneScape, some good indicators of a RuneScape addiction might be things like frequently missing school or calling out of work for RuneScape, or things like forgetting to eat while you're playing or neglecting your personal hygiene. So with all that said, the question is, what do we do about our gaming addiction? And in the case of secondary addictions, the way you treat the secondary addiction is to treat the primary issue that motivates that addiction. This would probably be some kind of a social anxiety disorder, but if you're an individual who suffers from this, your first order of business should be to talk to a psychologist in your area to get a more personalized look at what might be going on with you. They're often covered by insurance, and they're by far your most useful resource in working through these issues, not only because you get to work with them one-on-one, but also because you're likely to schedule repeat appointments, and so you can monitor your progress over time and continue to adapt your goals and continue working towards the future. If for any reason it's not possible for you to hook up with a psychologist, your next best choice is to hook up with a support group, and lucky for us, because this is a gaming addiction, they are plentiful all around the internet. I'll post a couple of links in the video description to resources that can help you find not only face-to-face meetings in your area, if that's what you're looking for, but that also host meetings through voice chats on the internet. Support groups like this are great for establishing some social interaction outside of RuneScape, on top of the fact that you're going to be building connections with people who are experiencing the same kind of issues that you are. You can trade ideas and advice and hold each other accountable. The use of support groups is so effective that even if you do hook up with a psychologist, likely the very first thing he's going to tell you to do as part of your treatment will be to hook up with a support group. Above all else, the most important thing is being kind and honest with yourself, recognizing that there's an issue and admitting it, and making the first uncomfortable step towards establishing a connection with one of the resources that can help. Thanks as always for watching, guys. As usual, the comment section is open if you've got something you'd like to say, or if you want to talk with me privately, my private messaging is always on. Just keep in mind that we are limited to being online, and so don't come to me for one-on-one therapy, but I'm always open to chat. Thanks in advance to everybody who's going to be supportive of each other on this issue, and I'll see you guys in the next video.